We have all seen Vikings portrayed on television and in movies. However, popular depictions of this ancient culture are often more fantasy than historical reality. A Viking man was most likely a farmer during the day, while his wife managed the household and cared for the family. At night, the entire family, and quite possibly their goats, slept together in a single large room. This is probably not the image that comes to mind when most people hear the word Vikings. Today we will explore some of the more unusual aspects of everyday life in ancient Viking culture. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Throne Unknown channel. After subscribing, take a moment to leave a comment and let us know which group of historic warriors you would like to learn more about. Now let us take a look at the real Vikings, not the Minnesota Vikings. They kept slaves and practiced human sacrifice. Viking society could be extremely harsh and brutal. They often raided their enemies' lands, and the spoils of these raids included prisoners who were brought back to Scandinavia and sold as slaves, known as thralls. Viking warriors sailed across Europe, attacking lands from Spain to Byzantium. During these campaigns, they frequently transported prisoners, particularly women, as part of an extensive slavery network. Archaeological findings have uncovered numerous iron collars used to restrain slaves, as well as evidence that suggests the existence of forced labor plantations in Sweden. As if that were not frightening enough, Vikings also practiced human sacrifice. Mass burial sites across Scandinavia support the accounts of Christian chroniclers who described atrocities committed in the name of the gods. It is no wonder that people feared the Viking raids. Warriors were placed on boats and set on fire. Although it is a myth that Vikings wore horned helmets, their legendary funerals were real. Highly respected warriors were sometimes placed on ships ranging in size from small rowboats to massive warships. These ships were loaded with grave goods, important items the deceased would need in the afterlife. These items could include jewelry, animals, weapons, and, in the most extreme cases, living slaves who belonged to the deceased. Once fully prepared, the ship, often still on land, was set on fire, sending the warrior off in a literal blaze of glory. While most people honored in this way were men, a significant number of women also received ship burials. In the 10th century, the writer Ahmad ibn Fadlan observed a funeral similar to this. He recorded that for wealthy individuals, 1/3 of their possessions was inherited by family, another third was spent on funeral garments, and the final third was used to purchase alcoholic beverages served at the cremation, a true Viking funeral celebration. They were skilled skiers. Scandinavia experiences extremely cold winters. Frozen ground made travel difficult, but the Vikings adapted to their environment. Archaeologists believe they often slid across ice using skis. Over 100 pinewood skis have been discovered preserved in bogs, confirming their use. It is worth noting that no Viking ski lift tickets have ever been found. Vikings also used ice skates made from the bones of moose or horses, and wooden sleighs have been found in the graves of high-status Viking women. They wore reverse mullets. Vikings are not widely recognized for their hairstyles, and there is a reason for that. When they first arrived in England, locals noticed a distinctive style, a short front with longer hair in the back, a reverse mullet. This hairstyle fell out of favor, particularly with the church, although it reappeared in later generations among Norman invaders descended from Vikings. Humans and animals shared the same living space. Viking houses typically consisted of a single large room. Families often shared this space with their animals. Some homes had 2 rooms to provide more comfort and prevent occupants from being trampled by goats while sleeping, but these were usually the homes of wealthier individuals. As Viking society advanced, wealthier families built larger homes with more space to accommodate people, animals, and stored food. The largest room in these homes was called the longhouse, which usually included a hearth and a cooking pit and served as a communal hall. Women could divorce their husbands. Viking women could hold positions as chiefs or warriors, though most did not. With men working long hours on farms, women were responsible for managing the household, which included stocking food, weaving, mending sails, and generally running the family. Viking women did not have an easy life. Adultery by a wife was considered a serious offense. In some regions, a man who discovered his wife's infidelity had certain legal rights, but women themselves also had protections. Viking women were allowed to divorce their husbands through a relatively simple legal process. Evidence shows this procedure, though rarely used, required a woman to assemble witnesses and formally declare the divorce. The process could be more complex if property was involved, yet the very existence of this right is remarkable for the time. In Viking society, a man who discovered his wife's infidelity could, in some regions, legally take extreme measures against both his wife and her lover. Conversely, men were allowed to maintain concubines or have children outside of marriage, a practice so common that early Christian observers sometimes mistakenly believed the Vikings were polygamous. Despite this, Viking women did have significant rights. They were permitted to divorce their husbands if they chose, through a surprisingly straightforward legal process. Evidence shows that this seldom used procedure typically involved gathering a group of witnesses and publicly declaring the divorce. While matters could become more complicated if property ownership was involved, the very existence of this right was remarkable for the time. For leisure, both Viking men and women played a strategy game called knafatafel, similar to chess, which is believed to have evolved from an earlier Roman game. They also played regular chess. A famous 12th century Norwegian chess set, known as the Lewis Chessmen, is preserved at the British Museum and consists of intricately carved pieces made from walrus ivory and whale teeth. This set is one of the few nearly complete medieval chess sets known to exist today. Knafatafel was deeply embedded in Viking culture and often appears in Norse sagas, played by heroes and kings. For example, the saga of King Olaf recounts a match between two historical figures, Knut the Great, who ruled England, Norway and Denmark, and one of his nobles named Olaf. Vikings were not illiterate. Both men and women used a runic alphabet called futhark, which consisted of 24 letters and could be used to write several Germanic languages. Futhark runes have been found carved into stones throughout northern Europe, and archaeologists believe that these inscriptions may have served mystical purposes. Storytelling was a central part of Viking life. They employed professional storytellers called skalds, who memorized long tales and recited them aloud around fires or in halls. These stories were not only entertaining but also served to educate younger generations about Viking culture, beliefs, and history. Skalds were often associated with royal courts, where they recounted tales that honored monarchs and embedded them into legendary genealogies. Thanks to the Skaldadal, an Old Norse book, we know the names of over 300 skalds who lived between 812 and 1200 AD. Their poetry made extensive use of literary devices called kennings, which are short metaphorical phrases that convey vivid imagery without repetition. For example, a poet might refer to death as the sleep of the sword. In the 13th century, Icelandic scholar Snorri Sturluson wrote a textbook explaining the meanings behind these kennings, preserving much of what we know today about Norse mythology. Diet was another important aspect of Viking life. Evidence shows that Vikings, regardless of social status, maintained a protein-rich diet. Even the poorest Viking typically ate better than the average English peasant during the same period. A typical Viking family ate twice daily, once in the morning and again after completing the day's work. Meat was a regular feature of their meals, including goat, reindeer, elk, lamb, beef, mutton, horse, and occasionally bear, thanks to the skills of Viking hunters. Pigs were also raised on farms, and pork was particularly popular. Most meat dishes were boiled, and one known dish, called scouse, was a hearty stew often served with bread made from beans, grains, or even tree bark. Fish was a staple for seafaring Vikings, with herring being widely consumed and prepared in various ways, including pickling, drying, salting, or smoking. The Viking diet was not exclusively meat. It also included fruits and vegetables such as carrots, beans, cabbage, and apples. Herbs and spices like cumin, mustard, coriander, and horseradish were used to enhance the flavor of otherwise bland food. Despite their hearty diet, Vikings faced health challenges. Archaeological studies of Viking sewers and cesspools reveal that intestinal parasites were common, and bread was sometimes baked with seeds from poisonous weeds, which could cause serious illness. Vikings also enjoyed alcoholic beverages, particularly mead, a fermented drink made from honey, water, and yeast. Mead was culturally significant and believed to inspire poetry. Norse mythology even includes a magical goat named Heidrun, who produces mead instead of milk. Feasting was a major aspect of Viking social life. Vikings loved to celebrate, and their feasts were massive events overflowing with food. These gatherings typically took place in large longhouses and were hosted by important figures, such as local chiefs or kings. Feasts could mark various occasions, from harvest festivals and religious rituals to personal celebrations like weddings, childbirths, or successful raids. While food was important, the main purpose of these gatherings was social. Feasts allowed leaders and subordinates to bond, reinforced political hierarchies, and helped form alliances, all of which were essential for maintaining Viking society and culture. Viking life was challenging, exciting, and deeply communal. From their strategic games and storytelling traditions to their hearty diets and vibrant social gatherings, Vikings were far more complex than the simplistic depictions often seen in movies and television.